is plain, it is common sense that free market capitalism is the reason living standards have vastly improved. It is the free market system and the investment in capital, in tools, machines, equipment, factories, and new technology the free market system encourages that is responsible for higher wages, fewer required working hours, ending child labor, increasing leisure time, bringing us the weekend, and improving working conditions. For the same reasons, free market capitalism has eroded poverty. The poverty rate in the United States fell from 95% in 1900 to around 12 to 14% by the late 1960s, a period in which government anti-poverty measures were fairly trivial. By the late 1960s, when Lyndon Johnson's war on poverty programs began receiving substantial funding, the poverty rate stagnated. By 1994, it was about the same as it had been in the late 1960s, even though the federal government was, by that time, spending 4 times as much per capita as it had under LBJ. Now suppose the situation had been reversed. Suppose the dramatic fall in poverty had occurred under the war on poverty, and that it was under the free market that the poverty rate had stagnated. We would never hear the end of it. We would hear, the free market does nothing to eradicate poverty, and only our wise overlords in the political class can do the job. But when exactly the opposite is the case, the facts are simply passed over in silence. In fact, over the past 20 years, world poverty has been cut in half thanks to the freeing up of markets and the capital investment that system encourages. One also finds that the poor do much better in nations with freer economies. If you measure income inequality using the Gini coefficient, you will find that there is less inequality in the most economically free countries than there is in the least economically free. What matters to most, however, is economic mobility. And again, more economically free economies have more economic mobility. More economic freedom means more opportunity and less poverty. If you're going to be poor, you'll want to be poor in countries with limited government intervention. In addition to trade, capital investment, and technology, sound economic institutions play a vital role in growing an economy and lifting people out of poverty. Sound economic institutions, or economic organization, refers to the ways that human activities are organized and the rules under which they operate, factors often taken for granted or overlooked. A healthy economy will experience prosperity because it is easy for people to engage in trade and to organize and start businesses. The extent to which an economy works well and flourishes largely depends on the legal system. It is the legal system that influences the degree of investment, trade, and economic cooperation. In fact, the essential ingredient for economic progress is a legal system that protects property rights, enforces contracts fairly, and settles disputes justly. Without these ingredients, investments will be lacking, trade stifled, and the spread of innovative ideas will be hindered or delayed. Because investment and improvements in technology reflect the actions of entrepreneurs, and because entrepreneurs are the driving force of a healthy economy and entrepreneurial genius is often found in unexpected places, economic progress depends on a legal system that allows a very diverse set of people to try their ideas to see if those ideas will pass the market test. But, as the video on Key Element 6 explained, the same legal system must also discourage entrepreneurs and their investors from squandering resources on unproductive projects that fail the market test. For this to occur and for the economy to prosper, markets must be open and competition must be present to hold entrepreneurs and their investments accountable. Their ideas must face the reality check of consumers, who will decide whether or not to purchase a product or service at a price above the product production cost. Consumers, after all, are the ultimate judge and jury. If they do not value an innovative product or service enough to cover its cost, it will not survive in the marketplace. Furthermore, without a just legal system that protects privately owned property and enforces contracts in an even-handed manner, an economy will flounder. In order for the 3 engines of economic growth, trade, capital, and entrepreneurs, to be effective, property rights must be protected. Property rights serve as the foundation, the cornerstone, the linchpin of economic progress. Without a proper understanding and respect for property rights, there is no way an economy will thrive. Property rights refers to those things that can be owned, such as labor services and ideas, as well as physical assets, such as buildings and land. To have private ownership, to have property rights, means to have the rights to exclusive use, the right to defend your property, and the right to transfer, to exchange or trade, or to lend or give away. Property owners may use their property in any way they want, as long as it does not infringe on the equal rights of others. If the legal system protects property rights, not only does an economy unleash the three engines of economic progress, trade, capital, and entrepreneurship, it encourages and incentivizes the following. First, private ownership encourages wise stewardship. Because the property owner reaps the benefits of taking care of their property and bears the cost if property is not maintained, there exists a strong incentive to take good care of what one has, including a person's ability to work, their ability to labor, mow lawns, wash cars, babysit, dig ditches, serve a burger, do taxes, design a bridge, programming, whatever. However, when property is collectively owned or owned by government, a person does not reap nearly as many benefits of taking care of the property and certainly does not reap any great amount of cost if the property falls into disrepair. Because of this system, the incentive to take good care of property is weakened. Imagine that you live in a community that has declared that all cars are now owned in common. No individual is allowed to own his or her own car. Keys are required by law to remain in the car's ignition, and all locks, also required by law, must be disabled. How would people's behavior change? Likely, cars would be driven much harder, increasing the wear and tear. People would likely only put in enough gas for what they need it for. People would likely not give up a car that happened to be full of gas, if possible. Oil changes would be rare, as would other basic maintenance. It would only take a few weeks, likely, until it was nearly impossible to find a car with a sufficient amount of gas. And how long would it take until most, if not all, cars were broken down? I'm sure if you took the time to think about it, you would come up with numerous scenarios that would likely happen because of a loss of property rights in cars. Thus, it certainly is not difficult to understand that communally or governmentally owned property would often be found in poor condition, very poor condition. Second, private ownership not only encourages good stewardship, but also encourages people to use their property productively. When people are able to keep the fruits of their labor as private property, when the natural right to own property is respected and legally protected, they have a strong incentive to improve their skills, to work harder and work smarter. When people have security, assurance they can keep what they earn, they will use land, buildings, and other assets they own more productively. However, if property rights are not protected, if people cannot trust their right to keep the fruit of their labor, that it will not be recognized and protected, then the willingness to invest time, energy, and money into developing and improving one's skills, talents, and interests will drastically diminish. Why go to college, or a trade or tech school, or start your own business if you are not able to keep the fruit of your own labor? Take, for example, the two earliest British North American settlements, Jamestown and Plymouth. Both endured incredible difficulties and experienced what is known as the starving time. In the early years at Jamestown and Plymouth, all production was to go into a common pool to be used, supposedly, to support the colony and generate profits for the Virginia Company. Working harder or longer was of no benefit to them, and they responded as anyone would, by shirking. The absence of property rights and the work-reward nexus that such rights create completely destroyed the work ethic of the settlers. But when both settlements reformed their land policy by instituting property rights and granting land, both began to quickly prosper, and colonists began to develop what became the distinguishing characteristic of Americans: an aptitude for all kinds of craftsmanship, coupled with an innate genius for experimentation and innovation. William Bradford, longtime governor of Plymouth, stated that after establishing private plots of land, those who had been lazy and indolent became very industrious. Third, In addition to property rights encouraging people to use their property productively, it also creates a strong incentive to develop things they own in ways that are beneficial to others. That's because private owners gain from actions that enhance their property's value to others. When a property owner is able to employ and develop their property in ways others find attractive, the market value of their property increases. The opposite, failing to employ and develop property in a way others find attractive, or using property in a way that others find unattractive, will diminish their property's value to others. For instance, students endure stress in college to develop their talents and skills in ways that future potential employers will find attractive and valuable, thus making them more marketable and likely to find a job. Owners or managers of apartment complexes have the same incentive. The more they can make their apartments attractive and beneficial to others, the more likely they will find tenants willing to pay more to live there. If an apartment manager ignores or fails to maintain an apartment complex, letting it get run down and shabby looking, the less likely people will want to live there. A much lower rent will be necessary just to attract enough people to fill all the units. Fourth, private ownership promotes the wise development and conservation of resources for the future. Without property rights and particular resources, it is likely that people will experience what is known as the tragedy of the commons. Tragedy of the commons, also referred to as the open access resource problem, is when individuals, acting independently and rationally, will deplete a shared resource, even when doing so is not in their best interest. This occurs because each user receives direct benefit of using the resource, but because the resource is not privately owned, only bears a fraction of the cost of its exploitation. Examples abound, such as African elephants near extinction, Amazon rainforest deforestation, and overfishing, to name a few. When possible, allowing private ownership of resources solves the problems created by the tragedy of the commons. When resources are owned privately, the owner has the incentive to protect the resource, to develop it wisely, and to conserve. Overgrazing, deforestation, and overfishing is much less likely under such a system. Owners of resources have an incentive to protect their resources and make sure they are not depleted. And a market economy operates in a way that is favorable to resources. When the scarcity of a privately owned resource increases, the price of the resource will rise. The higher price provides consumers, producers, innovators, and engineers with the following incentives. For consumers, because of the higher price, they will conserve on the direct use of the resource and look for substitutes. Producers, depending on the resource, will have the incentive to produce more. Plant more trees, for example. Producers, innovators, and engineers, because of the higher price, will search more diligently for substitutes. In the case of oil, maybe natural gas, coal, wind, solar, nuclear. And finally, producers, innovators, and engineers, because of the higher price, have the incentive to develop new methods of discovering and recovering larger amounts of the resource. To conclude, a legal system that protects property rights is foundational for the existence and operation of a free market system. And it is free market capitalism that is responsible for the vast improvements in living standards, for lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, and is the most effective economic system in allocating and conserving scarce resources. As long as property rights are retained, and people and companies and corporations bear the cost of their mistakes and reap the rewards of their successful innovations and work, the market system will provide the necessary incentives to conserve resources and to develop alternatives. Those who advocate that government intervene in this process by punishing the use of some resources and encouraging the use of other resources hinders the market process, causing the misallocation and wasting of resources, as well as delaying innovations and new technology that would solve the problem of scarcity and the negative externalities created by certain resources. In short, free market capitalism has been an incredible blessing to mankind and can continue to be as long as we don't shackle it.